I think Korea is a subject that's often overlooked. It's really the Air Force's first combat action as a independent force. And there are many career fields represented in that. And that's what we're going to try to work our way through today with airlift, close air support, special missions, and then air superiority. So with that, I'd like to ask Fred Hall the first question. Sir, when you look at the airlift mission and how it first came into play in Korea with the retreat southward, you were there. Could you please tell us your experience?
Well, after the Berlin airlift, I came back to the States and was part of Strategic Air Command follow-up. We were building Thule, Greenland. We went on maneuvers in May, and I saw some new type loading equipment. And lo and behold, June the 25th, 1950, they started the Korean War. Shortly thereafter, I arrived in Japan and started to set up on an Operation Grab Bag. We were going to evacuate people from the Pusan perimeter, as many as we could by air and some by ship. In other words, we were going to have a modern-day Dunkirk. Luckily, they made a breakout, and of course, they had the Incheon landing, and followed by going above the 38th parallel up to the Changjin Reservoir, where the Chinese stepped in, and they trapped the Marines and the Army up there. Air transport played a very important role. Now, they carved out rude runways, and the old Goonie bird came to view again. It didn't need much of a role, so therefore it got in and out, carrying supplies and wounded out. So they would bring the wounded back to another airfield, and the C-54s who brought supplies into that airfield would take the wounded back to Japan. Transport is a third party. You don't kill anybody in transports, but no service can get along without them. They're like the linemen in a football field. They're there, they're needed, but nobody really recognizes them. But they truly played an important part in what happened in Korea. During maneuvers, they practiced the airhead, and lo and behold, at the landing at Incheon, they established an airhead in Kimpo. Fighting was still going on, and the first transports were just now landing. So it was an unthankful mission, but everybody worked their heartstrings out, and they did the best they could. And again, it was another one of these things where the services combined to try to help each other out, only this time it was the Army and the Marines that needed the support, not the Air Force. So transports, again, came to the fore. And thankfully, somebody paid attention again. After the Berlin airlift, they said, yeah, we need these bigger transports. And here it is, less than 9 months afterwards. They're in a war, and they really need bigger transports. But the old C-54 came along, did its job, and the C-47s and the C-46s did their particular job, and the C-82s and the C-119s did theirs. Now, I don't know how many ever heard that much about what went on in Korea, but a lot of the bridges were bombed out and destroyed, shelled, and the C-82s and the 19s brought bridge parts in so that the Allies could bridge the rivers. So they played a very important part, both in the advance and the retreat, the second retreat. So again, like I say, transports while unsung, play a very, very important part. And you name it even today, what's going on in Afghanistan, you cannot turn your back on the transports because they're their lifeline. That's it.
Now, Colonel McGee, this is your second war. You had flown in World War II with P-51, and you returned to Korea in the P-51. I assume you came to this a little bit wiser, a little bit of experience that helped change your perspective, but it was also a different mission, much more in the ground support role with close air support. Could you please tell us about that?
Yes, indeed. That's part of my story. My last 51 mission in Europe was 17th November 1944, 29 August 1950, going down the runway in a P-51, fully loaded, ready for combat. Two squadrons came up from the Philippines, 18th Fighter Group, and we picked up P-51s. Well, we were supposed to get a little transition. The unit in the Philippines had given the 51s to the Philippine Air Force, and they thought they were flying F-80s, and said, well, we'll borrow a few planes back and give everybody a little transition. The mechanics looked at the aircraft and wouldn't let us fly them. So here I am going down the runway in a P-51, fully loaded. So it was a little bit shaky, for sure, but made it. We flew our first missions out of Japan while they built the first strip inside the Pusan perimeter. We moved over to K9 and continued our support, interdiction ground support. We did everything from napalm, rockets, bombs, 5-inch, 3-inch, and 5-inch rockets, depending on the mission. And we were actually flying out of Pyongyang Airport when the Chinese came into the war. We backed up rather rapidly.
With an aging airframe, how did you handle the spares and maintenance and obviously flying low level, the cooling system's a little vulnerable?
Well, the flying that we did was all low level, all the interdiction ground support. We did work with their forward air controllers on some occasion. Of course, the topography and so on there made it possible for us to continue. In my flying 100 missions there in Korea, never saw a MiG because they weren't down in the trees where we were at all. But we were glad to do the interdiction and ground support while they were getting the Sabre over to do the air work. And of course, it's one of the problems. We didn't declare war. We were supporting the United Nations, and so the restrictions don't help you win.
Now, General Lyon, you were flying special missions and engaged in a different role than Colonel McGee or Sergeant Hall. Could you please speak about that?
Which special missions are you talking about?
Just your experience.
You know what? I can't start off. I have to give some little background between this, if you wouldn't mind. And I guess I figured out in the end that I was the luckiest person ever. You like a different? It's going to be the same words.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear this better? Yeah. My wife's out there to check out that I don't say anything wrong here tonight. So I'm going to keep this really straight. But anyway, I'll just take a minute because I have to tell you some history because people look at me and say, how did this guy become a major general in the Air Force? And they say they can't hear it. Can we put this up somewhere?
Yes.
How about this?
Yeah.
There you go. Let's start over. This is the third time now. So I started out saying, I thought I'd just say a few words about explaining to you, I guess, how I got here and what happened to me in the Air Force, because it's a long, long story, but I won't bore you with the whole thing. But basically, I started flying when I was 16 years old. I wanted to go into the Air Force. I got into the Navy program, wanted to go into the Navy then, and wound up not getting into either one of them and became a civilian pilot and flew for a lot of government programs, both, if you can believe this, in the Navy and the Army. Then I applied to become a cadet in the Air Force and surprisingly did get approved for that. But in the meantime, the government had figured out that these flying schools that were civilian flying schools were going to start reducing in their size because we were building 50,000 airplanes a year and training probably 50,000 pilots. They didn't know where they were going to put them all. So anyway, I got into that program. The government opened a thing. If you had 1,000 hours and you can hear thunder and see lightning, you could get in this program, and that's how I got into it. So it was, they sent us to a school, and you heard during the World War II that there was a 90-day program to train officers. Well, this was a 30-day program, and when they got through, they didn't give us a commission. They gave us all, we were flight officers, which most people on the planet had never heard of what a flight officer was, but it had a blue thing and called the blue pickle. I don't know, has anybody in the room ever even heard of one of these? But this was, they graduated about 300 people. And then we went to the ferry command and started flying all kinds of airplanes. So I had the lucky time and young flying everything I could get my hands on, P-38s, name an airplane. So that's what happened. But moving through the whole thing, I got out of the Air Force after the war and then stayed in the reserves and kept with it. And finally went back on active duty in the Air Force. I did get commissioned in 1947, which was another miracle. And anyway, the point of it is I finally became a captain and volunteered and went to the Far East and arrived there. I was an operations officer. I got my little ditty bag, put it in the thing, went down to the office, and said, I want to do something here. Whatever you want me to do, give me a job. So they did. And the point of this all is it ties to this major that I work for. He was flying missions, and what we were doing in this thing is a very complicated thing, but we were flying, the program which was on paper was that we were dropping flares at night over the bomb line, which the Air Force did do, and we did it in a great, sure, and some of you remember were there or heard it, and the fighting was really difficult, and the Americans were fighting on the bomb line there for their life, and we did this in night, we did it in storms, we did it in rain, whatever it took, we were dropping those things in a pattern where we lit up the thing like a Christmas tree, and it saved a lot of lives. This was over some of those mountains that they got in the big battles. But the point is, this major that I work for, he said, look, I've got to train you to show you what you can do because I'm going to be home. He had flown so many missions. You're supposed to fly 175 while you were there. And every morning he'd go in and tear the paper down and then write a little number on it. And he'd been there a long time. When he left, we think he did 350 missions. And every mission he went on was really tough. So anyway, he said, I'm going to train you because they're going to send me home and I've got nobody to do any of this. So we were doing all kinds of different things. And he said, grabbed me one morning, he said, get in the airplane, we're going to take the C-47 and I want to fly you up in North Korea. And I said, well, that sounds great. We normally didn't fly it in the daytime in North Korea. And he said, no, we'll go out over the water where they can't get us. And so we flew up to an island, maybe some of you got there, I doubt it, called Chodo, which was 40 miles from the downtown Pyongyang, which is the head of where this was all happening. And we had a force of people there that were tracking all of the airplanes. And why they let it stay there, nobody knew. We had 2 destroyers out there, if they ever attacked it, to take everybody off the thing. The people that worked there the tour was for a year, but it was a great thing. So I thought they had a field up there, and he said, we're going to go up there and land. So I went over this, and he said, go over this mountain here on the edge. And I came over the side, there was a big, what would you call it, a sand beach there in an arc on. And he said to me, let's land this plane on the sand. So I looked at him, and I thought he was crazy because I couldn't think that was really possible, but I put that thing on, and he designated me. I was the only one in the squadron that could fly the airplane in there because it was a little tricky. The trickier part was getting out, not getting in, because there was a mountain and you went around this arc in the sand, and you just had to do it on a certain place. So you didn't come to hear that, you came here to hear the real story of why we were there and what we did. But in doing that, I saw how deep we got into the enemy, and they didn't do anything. They should have shut that thing down. They could have blown it off, sent 1,000 troops in there and cleaned it out, and we'd never have it. That's where most of the information came for our fighter pilots in the morning, because they could see those planes coming right out over the river down towards the south and give a big jump for them to get the F-86 up there. And the score, you can argue about what it was for the Korean War, was somewhere 11-1, 12-1. I've heard a lot of arguments of fighter pilots. I don't know what it was, but it was unbelievable. So anyway, as part of that whole thing that was going on, because we were supposed to be flying these things with the dropping the things every night, and I told you, when it's raining, thunderstorms, whatever it was, we were dropping those flares all night long, and we had a chain of people that came up and followed the next one. It was all time, so the lights never went out. It was constant, and it was a great, great thing. But that was what was on the numbers on the walls of the centers that we lived in, and what we were supposed to be doing. But besides that, what we were doing, we're dropping agents that had been recycled, I guess is the only way to say it, and going deep into the north, all the way to the rivers, all the way to even touching other countries up there. And I got into that thing, and what the point I want to make to you today is to think of the people that did that and how committed they were. Now, there were North people there. There were people they had captured and recycled. I call it, as a nice word for it. But anyway, so we went all over that place, and there wasn't one light you ever saw. I don't know if any of you that flew in North Korea during the war. Once in a while, somebody would light a fire, I guess, to cook dinner, but that's about all we saw. But what the point of this all is that we did that, and to see these people jump out of this airplane, we gave everybody one jump out of an airplane at 500 feet just to practice up for a little of this. And we did not only those kinds of people, and they communicated with some of them, but the idea that you have to get and understand is when they went on this mission, they knew they were never coming back. We never had one of them ever come back. And then as the war got hotter and hotter, the South Koreans wanted to engage more. And so we took up tens of people in the airplanes, 10 planes a night filled with people. And I flew a lot of those missions, and they were interesting to do. We took some of them up to the borderline of where the Chinese were right there. And what we had was a group of people that were doing the planning, And so what the people would do is push the thing for the moon phase so you could see. But they always pushed it a couple days ahead, hoping we could get more people out. We dropped people all over the place, hundreds of them. But then we had another mission, and we took soldiers up there. And these were people who volunteered, I guess, because nobody could do this and really be in their right mind. But they really wanted to do it. And this was the toughest bunch of people I have ever met in my life. They were killers. They had guns. They had sabers. They had every kind of thing. And so when I started to tell you, the people that were doing the planning, they would always fudge every month. They'd fudge the time that you could see up there. And when the moon doesn't come out, it does. You all know the fly. It doesn't come out. The stars won't do any good. So our thing was we were not allowed to drop anyone unless it was clear and you could see where you were dropping them. The regular ones we dropped out were at night in the snow at 500 feet after having one jump in an airplane. And we would through those, we do like, 300 people in an afternoon, one, plane after plane doing it. But what I learned out of the thing was these people that were going on these missions and knew this, they were never coming back. They couldn't wait to do it. I mean, they were just unbelievable. And I walked back in the C-46 one night, and one of these guys grabbed me by the throat, and I'm going, because we flew with the doors open. That was another thing. So we would never have any of these hang-ups of the doors. We're going to get these people out. And it gets really cold in the C-46 or anything else with that kind of weather. But anyway, he grabbed me, and I thought, here I go. I'm going out the side. He wanted a match to light a cigarette. So anyway, I got through that. But when the moon isn't out, it's not out. So we got up there, and you can't drop them. So we went back, landed in the C-46, and the captain came up in the cockpit, and he said, I don't think you should get out of the airplane just now. And I said, what are you talking about? I got my papers together. And he said, they are so mad at you that you didn't drop them tonight. It would be like somebody here that was going to have the governor pulled a thing on the wall so you weren't electrocuted. And you think somebody in that group would have been happy it didn't happen to them. But they were so mad they were ready to kill me. And he said, don't get out. We'll get them all in the trucks and get them going, and then you can get out. And that's what I did. But anyway, the spirit of those people and what the difference came in the end of what South Korea is now and what North Korea is, the difference, you know more about it than I do. But we had all these great pilots and all these people we tried to rescue people, we did all kinds of things. We couldn't get any information out about what was really going on there, and that's fine with everybody else, but they took care of all of us. So it was a great thing to be in. I stayed in the Air Force, got out, stayed in the reserves, and then finally had the great experience of being the Chief of Staff of the reserves for 4 years. And so I have no regrets and only happiness about the Air Force.
Thank you, sir. Now, above where C-46s and C-47s flew, we had F-86s engaging in some air-to-air combat. Now, Air Vice Marshal Harbison and Major Brooks, you both flew in World War II. You were in Spitfires and P-51s primarily. Could you tell us what it was like to transition into the jet age of aerial combat and your experiences there?
Am I hot?
Yep.
Oops. When the Chinese invaded North Korea, it came down the peninsula, excuse me. MiGs appeared over there and attacked in the F-84s that had already been there. So the Pentagon ordered the fourth group, which was F-86s stationed at Langley, where I was stationed, to Korea. We landed in Japan and then deployed to K-14, which was Seoul International Airport in Korea in November of 1950. The first flight, well, to get the airplane, it was cold. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. It was so damn cold that I wanted to surrender. But anyway, to get the airplane started, we had to get one started and pull it up in front of the other airplanes where the heat from that airplane would loosen up whatever had been tight to get the others started. So 4 of us went up to the Yalu on December the 22nd, led by Lieutenant Colonel Don Nance, who had limited experience. We had Bud Bach, who had practically no experience, and Nick Farrell and myself. Nick had been in the 8th Air Force. I'd been in the 15th. We had World War II experience. So we were cruising at 42,000, as high as I'd ever been in an airplane. The most efficient altitude for the F-86 was 36,000. But we were at 42, just hanging on, just above stall speed, going up the Yalu. The sun was behind us, and I could see Antung, which is across the Yalu. I could see the airdrome, and I could see dust being churned up, but it was so far away I couldn't see the airplanes. It was so small. But we knew they were taking off. What we didn't know was that there was a flight of 8 already airborne. And as we went up the Yalu, as I mentioned, there was the sun to our back. Nick Farrell called out MiGs at 6 o'clock. I turned and looked back, and I could see contrails. At that high altitude, I was amazed to see that there were contrails. And I hollered, "Break right." Nick broke right, I broke right. The flight commander, he stalled and spun in. Really, he spun down out of the fight. Bud Bach went left, and the MiG got him, and they left Nick and myself against the rest of them, which were probably 6 anyway. And we went around and up and down, and finally, I said to Nick, I said, "Let's get the hell out of here." And he said, "Right." So we started back, and they chased us for a while, but they couldn't catch us. But it was the first fight that I'd ever been in that I'd lost. And I felt very badly about that. But there were a lot of reasons we lost the fight. And as I said, the inexperience of the flight leader, the airplanes were F-86As. We had the radar range and sights, but the MiGs had much lighter. They had more firepower. And they had radar that had tracked us all the way up to the Yalu. And we hadn't gotten radar over there at that time. We went up the next couple days later again, and I latched onto a MiG. And I started firing. I had him at zero deflection, and my guns hadn't been harmonized, and they were shooting to the right. And I thought, well, this is no place to be with guns not firing the way they should. So I got the hell out of there and came home. Shortly thereafter, the Chinese came down much closer to our base. We could hear counter fire at night, counter artillery fire. We were that close to the front lines. And we had to evacuate. We came back to Japan and then deployed a couple of flights to Pusan as ground support, which was not very romantic. It was a far different thing than we had wanted to do, and I came back to Johnson Field, where I came home eventually, but later on they got better F-86s into combat, which were the 86Es, which had the flying tail. It had hydraulic operated controls, and with the radar range in sight, it did a lot of damage to the MiGs, as you probably know if you read your history. A few years ago, I was invited to Moscow to be decorated for a mission out through Russia in World War II, and at a cocktail party thereafter, engaged and talked to a couple of MiG pilots, and one of them had about 8 Sabre jets to his credit. And he didn't look like a Russian, really. He looked like an American. I don't know what kind of nationality he was, but he was a real nice man. And he said what puzzled us most, the victory, discrimination between the two was they didn't understand how we were so accurate with our guns, firing our guns. And what it was very simple. The radar ranging guns we had, they didn't have. They had the old 100 mil sight or the 90 mil sight. But they eventually captured one of our airplanes, which I think Bud Ewing took in when he crash landed in a rice paddy, and they captured the gun sight that we had, and it was too late to copy it, of course. It never got into production, but they were amazed at the difference in the victory, number of victories that we were getting, and they were not. So that's my story. I resigned from the Air Force and went to work as a test pilot in North America, testing the airplanes that I'd been flying in Korea, by the way, so it was kind of fun. Kenny Sturgeon over there, he flew the same airplanes. I guess, did you, Kenny? Is that right, Pat? Did he? Yeah.
What did you say?
I said, you flew the A's and the D's and E's and that right, Pat, didn't you? Of the 86s? Well, anyway, maybe he did.
I like the F best, but it came later.
The F was a Cadillac of the 86 series. It had the aerodynamic slats and a lot of other things that made it a real nice airplane. But anyway, other airplanes were better, so thank you.
Sir, over to you.
My interest in the Korean War became, I was on the staff of the Central Fighter Establishment of the Royal Air Force, where tactics were involved. It wasn't a test establishment testing aircraft, but tactics. And Major Jabara came by when the Korean War had started and gave us a talk and stimulated our interest. And the Ministry of Defense then asked General Vandenberg, who was then the chief, if he would sponsor some of our pilots, RAF pilots, to go to Korea. And he sponsored 4, and I was one of the 4. Kimpo was a very interesting war, and it was the last of the gun versus gun fighters, and the first of missile-armed fighters later on. I find it, I should add that I had been an exchange pilot at the first fighter group in Marks Air Force Base in Riverside, and was on the first F-86 wing. And by the time I got to Korea, I had a tremendous amount of F-86 time. I went through the Clover College that they had, which was to tell you how to escape and evade. Hopefully not needed, but there it was. And I started flying missions. I should say that it was a court-martial offense at the beginning to cross the Yalu. But of course, we spent most of our time on the other side anyway. I'm trying to think of what was interesting. I'd rather take questions if it could, that'd be simple.
Okay, before we do that.
Hey, Doug?
Yep.
Put it closer to their mouth.
Sure. Before we do questions and answers, we have a special presentation that we'd like to make from the 60th anniversary of the Korean War commemoration. So,
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Major General Tom Masiello. I'm currently in the Pentagon working on OSD, and my job is not nearly as interesting as the stories we heard. First of all, I just want to say it's just absolutely my honor to participate. We just have a very small token of appreciation, a small little certificate, but it can no way say thanks for all the sacrifices that you have made. But again, this is actually comes from the Secretary of Defense. And before I read it, though, I just want to say what a treat it was, a true treat to hear everyone's stories. You know, Korean is sometimes referred to as the forgotten war. And just spending, and really, literally, it was only about 30 minutes. But in those 30 minutes, I think everyone would agree that we just got such a feel for that conflict and how important it is to hear from the folks that have fought in their own words. It brings to life so much more so than a book can do. So again, thank you, all of you, real heroes, for participating today. You don't know what it's meant to me, and I thank everybody else in the crowd. So let me get on with the certificates. And it's a certificate of appreciation. And I'll read the words here, and then we'll hand out to each one of you. It says, in recognition of honorable service during the Korean War in defense of democracy and freedom, through your selfless sacrifice, the tide of communism on the Korean Peninsula was halted and liberty triumphed over tyranny. The Department of Defense and the people of America and Korea are forever grateful. And it's signed the Honorable Leon Panetta, Secretary of Defense. And I'll just read each of the names off, and then if you would please hand it to him. First of all, Major James Brooks. William Harbison. Major General William Lyon. Colonel Charles McGee. And Staff Sergeant Fred Hall. Let's give them all a round of applause, please.
Well, with that, we are out of time, but thank you very much for your attendance. And gentlemen, thank you very much for participating with us this afternoon.